Hello, good morning and welcome everybody. I'll just give it a few minutes to get started while more of you join. Welcome to the third workshop of the EU-funded project, Accessibility. My name is Rachel Vaughan. I'm Head of Operations at ESPD, and I'll be moderating today's session about online care services. I have short brown curly hair. I'm wearing glasses and a white top. I'm female. I'll start with some technical information. This event provides international sign language interpretation, and you should be able to see that via the video on your screen. And we also provide real-time captioning. You can activate that using the toolbar on the bottom of your screen by clicking the three dots. Please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section, and at the end of the session we'll have some time to answer. Please, if you have a specific question for anybody, write their names or the name of the speaker to who you're directing the question to, and then we can make sure it goes to the right person. If it's more general, no need to leave a name. If you have any comments or information you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. And you can pop that into the chat. So just to get started then, as more of you join, just to repeat that this event has international sign language and captioning, and the instructions on how to access both of those are displayed in the chat. So let's get started. Welcome to our webinar on online care services or telecare services. This involves the delivery of health and social care to people within their home or in the wider community outside of formal institutionalized settings, providing support systems enabled through information and communication technology. We saw that COVID-19 greatly disrupted our everyday lives, and there was an acceleration and a greater need for this digital transition and the adaptation of care services to maintain the provision of care for people in need of support. But that obviously showed up challenges as well, exposing the digital divide and accessibility issues faced by many people in society. So today we're here to talk a little bit more about the barriers, the opportunities, and also the needs of persons with disabilities when using online care services. So we have two panels today with some great speakers. So we'll move on to our first panel and our first speaker, Dr. Emmanuel Frangria. He's Professor of Service Design and Innovation at the University of Applied Sciences in Western Switzerland. And he's also a board member for a foundation in Switzerland where they conduct and encourage research aimed at improving the situation for persons with disabilities. Can you, Emmanuel, please tell us a little bit more about your work on service design for accessibility?
Yes, thank you very much, Rachel. We know about the designs of products, okay? For instance, in my hand, I've got glasses. These are mine. I love them. It's been designed by engineers, by artists, in order that when I'm wearing my glasses, I can read on the screen. A service is a bit different. And here, we're interested in services that will help people to live a better life. So, what's the definition of a service? I often use a very simple definition. A service is a problem resolution that will change the life of the user. For instance, I go to the hairdresser, and then I'll be more beautiful. At least it works for most people. In our case, It's very often about designing assistive technology that will be integrated in a service. For instance, I'm in a wheelchair and I would like to go to the vacation in the mountains. So I got an app, an assistive technology that will tell to the train, to the train conductor that I'm arriving in Geneva at this hour. Okay, when I'm arriving, the personnel will be there helping me to enter the train, and then when I'm in the mountains, to get out of the train. So beautiful technology. But it's not the end of it. Then this app will tell to the bus driver or the shuttle that goes to the hotel that I arrived and I'll be able to enter the shuttle, and the driver will also help me to enter the hotel to go to the reception desk. Okay, so here again, a service, even if it's based on technology, will change my life, will make that even if I'm in a wheelchair, like every other people, I can go to vacation and enjoy the beautiful panorama in that mountain destination. So for us, it's natural to think that behind these glasses I'm wearing, there's a designer. But for people, it's not natural that, for instance, when this app that enable me to go to vacation, there are designers. So service design is a bit different, and that's what I'm going to explain you. But it's also very important, okay? It's not solely about developing an app that is functioning. It has to be tested during what we call my user journey, during my customer journey, to see if it's really helpful, okay? Never forget, the goal is not to have an app that is functioning. The goal is that I can go to vacation easily with no problem, and that's it. So what we need to understand is that the design of a product, usually it's done in the R&D of a company. R&D is research and development. You've got engineers, they've got prototypes, they're testing the product. They're testing if my glasses are really helpful for me. But when you're doing a design of a service, it's more, can be compared to like a symphonic orchestra. In the symphonic orchestra, you've got excellent musicians. They all have very good instruments. But in order to do their concerts, they need to train for months. And service design is a bit like that. There are 4 steps. So let me take this case of that service based on an app that will help me to go easily to my destination in the mountains. So we can compare that to a music composer. First, you need to do the field work. The field work is to interview people like me that are in a wheelchair, is to do immersions. So I will observe people in wheelchair to be sure that my service will address these specific needs. And then it's like for a music composer to do a little excursion to get the inspiration or to listen to world music, for instance. And then second phase, that will be a script. That's where you draw the service experience. That's the story of the service experience, with the beginning, with the middle, and with the end. And so we script, we draw that service experience based on the field work. So here for the composer is using a musical score and is writing notes, the melody, the arrangements, okay? The third step is about, we call it the staging, okay? We want to see if that melody, if that problem resolution for me going from Geneva to the mountains with the public transportation. So in that staging phase, we will do a lot of testing and testing, okay? With people like me in wheelchair, to be sure that first I can use easily the app, but also that it really helps me to go from Geneva to the mountain destination. After plenty of trials where we improve the service experience, so that's the service design, the design of the service experience, we'll put that into production. Meaning we'll make this app available to people like me in wheelchair, and also I will get all the training I need to use that. But it's a never-ending process, because when it's in production, when it's available to people, I need to be sure to include all the complaints. For instance, I'm complaining because I arrived late and it was done, the service was done, but done in a hurry, okay? So that's about service design. It's not the design of product, but the design of an experience. And I think you understand, it's necessary. We cannot improvise the creation of a new service, and it has to be tested and tested and tested. We say that it's human-centric. Put always the user in the center of your design. Okay, the idea is that it's a problem resolution for me. But if it's for me, it will be, we say, a universal design. It will enable inclusivity, meaning that an old person that has some mobility problem will benefit from that too. Okay, and that's the idea. The other characteristic of service design is that it's based on iteration. Okay, try and learn approach. Okay, we try a first solution, maybe it's not optimal, but let's try another possibility. It works better, so let's make it available to everybody. Okay, so that's what I wanted to explain service design in a simple manner. Just to tell you that for our field, when we are designing assistive technology, we want it to be integrated in the actual service experience. in order to provide a real benefit for people and for the entire society. Okay, this is the end of my introduction to service design.
Thank you very much. I think you started on a really important message of we have to think about what is the goal of the use of this technology and its development. It's not about developing an app for the sake of the app. It's about thinking of the end user and improving their quality of life and developing something that can be used by everybody. I think that's another important point when talking about accessible services. And that's very important. It's not just persons with disabilities who could benefit from this technology, but it's everybody. But we still don't see it being taken up by maybe more mainstream platforms and technologies. Based on some of the lessons you've learned from the pandemic, what do you think are the main challenges for adaptating accessible digital services?
I think that, okay, we need to use service design to develop good services. And what's good, as you just told Rachel, is that the innovation can come from our community. And it's a good thing because it will benefit to the entire society. The second thing, it's not solely about service design, it's also about a change of mindset. Before COVID, we would be in the physical system, and typically a person like me in a wheelchair will have a disadvantage being hired by a company, by a classical company. We know that thanks to teleworking, my handicap is not an issue, is not a problem. So what we've learned with COVID is that there's been an acceleration of services that we can do online, okay? But we still not have changed our mindset that me, behind the screen, I can be directly operational, and this, it's still not digested, it's still not integrated.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for opening for us. I'll now move on to Emmanuel Frangria, the director of the We Care More Center for Innovation and Research at Aias Bologna in Italy. He's also acting Secretary General for the Association for the Advancement of Assistive Technology in Europe, AAATE, and also the Global Alliance of Assistive Technology Organizations. So you'll be speaking to us more about the opportunities available for the use of technology and services. So I'll hand over to you, Emmanuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you also to Emmanuel, who actually spoke a lot about the topics that I would like to discuss as well with you today. But that's not a problem. I think it's just a complementary information. So as mentioned, I'm director of the We Care More Center for Research and Innovation of AAS Bologna. And what is interesting to know is that AAS is an organization of people with disabilities and their family members. So it is an NGO, a non-for-profit organization. And we're working since 40 years on the relationship between technology and disability. So what technology can do to make people's lives better. More recently, about 4 years ago, we started with this We Care More Center. And the idea is to become a resource center, or to be, which partially we are already, a resource center for public and private care providers that want to capture the benefits of the digitalization in society and to deliver better technology-enabled, person-centered care services, especially when these integrate health and social care related aspects. So we do a lot of projects in this field, also research projects like the ones that Emmanuel spoke about. So funded by European money, or not only, but we also do a lot of some development ourselves. We have a team with coders, the team is very multidisciplinary. So that means that we have different people with different disciplinary backgrounds in the team, and that's another characteristic of our work. We believe in this multidisciplinary approach. We are very much inspired, and that shouldn't surprise you then after what I said about the multidisciplinary approach, by a sort of a biopsychosocial tech model of human functioning. And the tech is actually quite new to that. We all know, we probably have heard about ICF, we know about the biopsychosocial model of human functioning. So challenges that can be at different levels, but also solutions, or and we believe that we are living now in an era where technology, and not just walking sticks, but high-tech technology and artificial intelligence, etc., really empowers people and can be used in such a way that it becomes almost part of human existence, to overcome barriers and to create opportunities for participation and inclusion. So talking about care and support providing ecosystems and services, both before and post-pandemic, we often highlight what happened after the pandemic and how this field got, let's say, boosted, got pushed by the pandemic experience itself. But basically the issues were already there. The need for care systems is to better integrate, so to maximize well-being and self-determination, starting from the person, of course. The quality of care to continue, or to even improve the quality of what is delivered and the life of the people that we support. Sustainability is a very important challenge that was already there long before the COVID experience. Secure and resilient. Now, technology and on all these let's say performance indicators can actually have a huge impact, and allows us to really make change the game in this field. The problem is, of course, what happens if services are not accessible. And in preparing for this, I looked into some definitions of accessibility, and I like this one here. It's the degree to which a product, device, or a service or environment is available to as many people as possible. And that's closely what has been already been connected to what has already been said before. I don't know whether you're familiar with the fact that the WHO and Unicef has recently produced the first global report on assistive technology. You can easily download it from the website of the World Health Organization. It's a very comprehensive and interesting document. It's really something which we expect will make a big change in the world in providing access to assistive technology to larger groups of the population at global level. And they speak about achieving universal accessibility. And I think it's worth reading this. It's a bit long, but it's worth reading it together. Achieving universal accessibility requires a cohesive approach to access and inclusion. For a service to be accessible, the buildings or online platforms that house these services must be accessible. Services must be designed inclusively, and staff need to be adequate disability, equality, and awareness training need to have. If any one aspect of the user journey is inaccessible, then the whole service is considered inaccessible. And for a service to be truly inclusive, everyone, irrespective of differences or diversity, should be able to experience that service in an equal way without the need for overlay or special treatment or provision. So I think that comes quite closely to what Emmanuel described so nicely as the user experience that has to be central, and that if any one of these, let's say, factors that make the complexity of the entire service is not accessible, then actually the whole service is not accessible. So if you look at the dimensions of accessibility of digital services, there are a couple of interesting aspects to note. For example, the availability. We all know that not all what is possible is actually available, and what is available is not available everywhere or to anyone. So that is an important point of accessibility, the availability itself. The acceptability, so users have to see this as really a sort of a solution. Also, Emmanuel used the word solution that we also use a lot. Have to accept that solution as being actually of possible impact to them. And it has to be affordable. So there should be funding in place, or it should be clear who should pay for what. And then the more classical interpretation of accessibility, which is the interaction with the digital environment. So the human machine or the human interfaces with the technology, with the solutions that are in place to provide people actually access to the service. And that can be distinguished in physical accessibility and cognitive accessibility. And under cognitive accessibility, we include the understanding, the awareness, comprehensiveness of the information, the accessibility of the language, etc., etc. So how can we improve the accessibility when we design services? Well, first of all, to start from the user experience and to include the user in all stages of the development and the design of the service. Better even to make them leaders in the co-production or co-design process of the new service. To foresee multimodal interaction and communication. We all use different ways of communication, or we have let's say, can use better different ways of communication. So multimodality in the communication is very important. Fortunately, there are also a lot of standards already and guidelines that we can use. So for web content design, for user agents, which are the software, the devices that are between us and the service. For wearable devices, so the accessibility of wearable devices and sensors that capture, for example, in a more passive way, data from an environment or from a person's health condition. And that has to be accessible as well. And for language use, already mentioned. And another recommendation would be to collect expert advice, especially if you're new to the field of accessible design or use of universal design. So talk to experts, people that can actually help you to understand whether what you're designing is accessible. And of course, the extensive trialing with different user groups. I have two examples of projects that we've been involved in to illustrate the last 2 points. The project is called Proact, and a consortium of universities and companies has designed an online platform that collects data about older people living with multimorbidity, who include data directly into the system, or the system captures in an automatic way data from their environment, and that are distributed then to caregivers and medical experts. Now, when they showed us the mock-up and the first, let's say, version of the system, so during the so-called friendly trials, the team retrieved a couple of issues, and there's much more, but this is just to pinpoint some of the aspects that normally create problems. For example, the buttons are very small on the side of the device, so difficult to use by an older person with maybe tremor or difficulty, or visual difficulties. There was no display, so people didn't get a feedback from the devices. The way the system was managed on a smartphone or a tablet was quite complex for target users. The watch, which was retrieving physical activity and potential fall, was very, very small, the display, so difficult to read the information. It was hard to understand the information which was provided by the system. Color could be an issue, and also the interaction paradigm itself. So how do people actually interact physically with the device? Improvements were made, and in the end we retrieved also feedback from the users of the system. And again, then it's nice to see that if a lot of attention goes into the design process itself and all these accessibility issues are properly addressed, you can actually retrieve also from older people working with quite complex systems, positive feedback. So there was one person who said, oh, it's not complicated. It's not complicated to me. Even I left school when I was 13 years, I can still manage well with this system. Or people said, oh, compared to laptops or the PC, the iPad actually is much more user-friendly. So you can see that by choosing well the devices you work with and assess their accessibility, you can really impact on the user experience. There were, of course, also some negative feedback. So someone found that the font could still be bigger. So again, and here this brings me back again to what Emmanuel says about the iterative design phase. As you're never ready, you can always improve it, and that's what we did. So that was it, Rachel, for my as an introduction.
Thank you very much. You've already mentioned a few recommendations, but based on your experiences in these projects and also in your positions, what are your main recommendations for building person-centered services that are delivered remotely?
Well, first of all, that person-centeredness is not just a buzzword that we use it or we abuse it, but that it's actually, it is very important. We have to start from the user needs and expectations, and really follow up on what they indicate as what is important to them. Another point I think is that technology should be safe and secure, and that is a lot of clarity about how the data of people are protected. What we see more and more, or increasingly, is that people are aware of that there are issues related to the protection of their personal data. And for some services that we've helped to design, and where this was not fully, let's say, under control, this really became a sort of a killer factor for the whole experience. So there's an increasing group of people, also older people, that actually say, no, I don't want to share my data because I don't know what happens with them. So this is sometimes maybe not justified, because there is a GDPR, there is legislation, there are mechanisms to fully protect people's data, but nevertheless, it is sort of a stereotype in society that big companies are just doing with our health data what they want, and for that reason we should not give them any longer or share them any longer. And so that is something to brings me also to the trust, the topic of the trust. People need to trust you, and there should be a lot of communication around the introduction of this kind of technologies.
Thank you very much. Something that you mentioned is about data use, starting to talk a bit about maybe the ethics and the risks of using technology. And so with that, I'll move on to Steve Barnard. Thank you very much, Evan. Steve has worked in the care sector for over 40 years. He has a background working as a practitioner, a manager, and director supporting adults and children with disabilities, both learning and physical disabilities. And you're going to talk a little about the ethics of using person-centered technology. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Rachel, and hello, everybody. I started using Telecare, as it was then, 20 years ago, and I could not understand, having been involved in service delivery for many years, why people weren't using it. So I asked a stupid question, which is, why? Why don't we do this? And I came up with ethics. Right. So what is ethics? It isn't always about right. It is about right and wrong, good and evil, virtue and vice. So it's not just about the technology. It's about why we bother at all to care, what we call care. And I started looking at various what become ethical barriers. So we have the says right and wrong. So why are we confused? And then I looked at religion. So a Christian religion would say you actually support people who have disabilities. If you're Chinese or possibly Scottish, you might be touched by the angels, or you might be punished. You look at history. In the UK, there's a history of philanthropy. looking after people quote. In some countries, there's not. You look at culture, and that's quite interesting because we talk about looking after people, which is a bit patronizing, or do we support people? Or we look at other possibilities. Has a person acquired a disability, perhaps through a war? So you feel, quote, sorry for them. Or were they born with a disability? What about the legislative framework? In the UK, again, they have the Mental Capacity Act, which assumes that someone with a learning disability or whatever has capacity. Before that, you assume they didn't have capacity. For those with sight problems, the next caption or slide shows two examples of the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. One says, you do what I tell you, and the one that says, I want to fight for my rights. However, you then hit the very difficult issue of resources, especially funding. We think everybody should have rights, perhaps, but we don't have the resources to make that apparent. And that is certainly true in design, as mentioned by the previous panelists. There's a variety of technology, as you can see on the screen, and I won't read them all out, but I will mention accessibility. Do you design something for the majority of people and then put a few tweaks or change it to make it accessible to other people? Or do you design it at the beginning so that everybody can use it, or at least the majority can use it? And there's various things designed for all and so on. And as Jan mentioned, there's the really interesting issue of data. So we live in a more interconnected world, which relies heavily on a robust infrastructure. As COVID has shown us, if the internet goes down and you're relying on the internet via Telecare or whatever, you're stuck. In talking about this, it is really important to mention that it is not about the technology, it's about the outcomes. What are you actually trying to achieve? And that becomes incredibly important because people can get lost in the technology and making the technology work and forgetting why they're bothering in the first place. So I mentioned outcomes. And there are a variety of outcomes, as shown in the next slide. Does it help to make the person independent? Does it put the person in control of themselves or their environment? Does it help them communicate? Does it help them in education? Does it help them, as really explained well by Emmanuel, in their mobility? Does it help them control their own health or give early warnings? Does it help them enter the world of leisure and arts? Does it make them more safe? Now, safety is something that people can shy away from, but it can be incredibly important to people to feel safe. So I had really trouble explaining why technology could be of benefit. And I ended up, surprisingly, going right back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People used to think that technology would help people with a higher part of the triangle, self-actualization, esteem needs, social needs, etc. However, technology can really help at the base of the triangle, safety needs and physiological needs. A monitor that says you've opened a door when perhaps there are issues about that is about safety. Being able to open the door is about control. These are all issues to do at the bottom of the triangle. And we also looked at an ethical framework that said, go through some levels of understanding. Does the technology help the person be more independent and stay in control? Is it a benefit to the person? Does it do the person harm? is there a sense of justice? And that can be interpreted differently by different cultures. Excuse me with the technology. So some questions, basic questions to ask when using technology. What outcome are you being addressed? And that should probably come from the assessment. And remember what I said, it's about outcomes, not about the technology. Second question, who is the technology for? It might be for the individual. It might also be for the carers. So to alert the carers that some incident has taken place could be of incredible benefit. Do you have a policy on consent? What happens if the person says, no, I don't want to use it? Who is supporting the technology? What happens if it goes wrong? What happens when it will go wrong? What happens when it stops working? Can you get some maintenance, or do you stick the technology in a cupboard and don't worry about it? So those issues can be very basic, but very interesting results. That you'll be pleased. Oh, here we go again on the technology. That is all I want to say in 8 minutes. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Steve. Again, I think you've maybe given us more questions than when we started, but I think that's good. Again, talking about the importance of the outcome rather than the technology itself, making sure it's accessible. You touched importantly on the access to infrastructure, and we need to be able to access the internet or phones or other specific technology. Jan mentioned it as an example, and you touched on it at the end of your presentation with the questions. What if somebody doesn't want to receive support or care through technology? What then?
I think that's a really interesting question. The answer basically, I think, should be, how would you like to feel if you had a disability and somebody else told you what was good for you and what wasn't good for you? You'd struggle. Now, there might be times when it is good for you, however you define good, but you might still choose to say no. If those issues are explained to you and you still choose to say no, and you take the consequences. It's a fascinating area, and it comes back to the question of what is the technology for, why is it being used, and who is in control?
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree. It's important to stress it's about the end user being the person who's in control and defines the care or support that they receive, and it shouldn't be compromised for the type of care that they choose to have. So thank you very much. Thank you to our first panel of speakers, and we'll move on now to our second panel. We'll start with Anna Pinevla, project manager for Texas Social Technologies Foundation, where they've been developing technological projects for the social sector for around 12 years, especially with persons with disabilities and other disadvantaged groups. So could you please tell us a little bit more about your work to provide telecare services at your organization?
Good morning. Thank you, Rachel. My name is Anna Peñalver, and I work at Texas Foundation. I can see a lot of in the audience, a lot of familiar people. So I think that my Spanish-English pronunciation is going to be really easy for all of you. First of all, thank you for inviting us to this event. It's really inspiring to be here because it brings together two things that we are really passionate about in our foundation: technology and accessibility. Texas Foundation is an entity created in 2002 between Spanish Red Cross and the Vodafone Foundation. And our values are proximity to social needs and collaboration with other entities, with the aim of developing innovative solutions that generate real and sustainable impacts based on ethics, universal design. So the panel before makes me really easy happy to speak about all of that. I am going to share later my website, the website of Texas, so you can know more about us. Nowadays, talking about applying technologies to social issues is standardized, but I think that is something pretty new, and a great deal of awareness raising work by entities such as those of us we are here today. The great specialization of Texas is Technological Innovation Center on the end user. And our organization, we have an innovation process to solve the different challenges that involve the users in the different stages of gathering user requirements, validation, and testing. The result of these years, for example, is an analysis of product based on a social technology, and is a platform with the name of Orientatech. It's a kind of TripAdvisor of social technology, where on one hand, our engineers technically validate if the product really works. And on the other hand, the end users have the opportunity to validate on a social level. It's a kind of holistic feeling with the technology. I mean, it's not only if it's accessible, or maybe it's a kind of feeling, the color, the aspect, the everything. Among of that of the solution, you can find many for the improvement of the social autonomy and safety. Related to the online remote care services, the first challenge we had on the table was how to transfer the typical home telecare based on a physical device and oral communication, and with a high manipulative skills, to a mobile and more accessible device and services. In Spain, for example, the telecare service is 24 hours a day, 365 days. And we attend two kinds of emergencies. On one hand, the health emergencies called requesting attention to health problems, and it requires a quick action. And in other side, the psychological care requests called requesting attention in situations of crisis, loneliness, anguish, needs of communication. You can imagine during the pandemic time which kind of emergencies we receive more, the second ones, of course. In the Spanish Red Cross, our approach to telecare at the beginning, it's based on the elderly, and therefore our approach to the service is potentially designed for these profiles. This is our working context around telecare, and therefore our awareness and commitment to make it accessible was as it follows. If we want our telecare beneficiaries to never stop being beneficiaries of telecare, even if their aging-related abilities to communicate change, we must to adapt to them. This paradigm allows us to open up the spectrum and to consider why not set up ourselves an even more inclusive challenge to create a telecare for everyone based on a universal design and with an accessible technology and care system. So in 2010, we firmly set up this commitment, and we are still working in it today. We have a real service with different functions adapted to several user profiles. But I would like to highlight just the next points. Firstly, we work on a regulatory level. And fundamental, the review and change of the regulations to provide the telecare service on equal terms. We have been key actors such as, for example, Fundación 11, or Union, or our colleagues that are here today in order to change and review these national rules. Secondly, we work on an info accessible service level, making the information to be able to access to the service, as well as the website or documents, and also incorporating people and professionals who provide information about the service, and they really know the different communication alternatives with the end users. Third, and something really important for Texas, is the accessibility of the equipment for the provision of Telecare services. At technological level, this is the area that is mainly led by Texas Fundación. We have been working progressively on an inclusive technological solution that respond to people's needs. For example, with chat communication, pictograms, peripherals for people with physical disabilities, compatibility with Braille line, etc. Related with that, in 2016, we received the Union Accessible Mobile Application certification in order to certify this part of our system. The last line of intervention is around online care services and is to adapt the services care system. That is the people, the professionals, or the entities behind of a call emergency, a follow-up call, or a request for a psychological support. To do this, the call center has to be adaptive, not only of course, the technical part, but also to prepare the staff and the protocols to use in order to give a really good answer. In other words, and to summarize, in a real case, if a deaf-blind person activates a call by his Braille keyboard or a button on his mobile phone, these calls came to the Red Cross Telecare Center, and the professional already knows that at that moment she is Maria Perez, a 60-year-old deaf-blind woman who lives with her blind husband, for example. So now we start the communication with her, knowing all of this background and at that level. To get this service that we have today, it has been necessary to design and innovate with the end users, of course. And currently we have more than 160,000 people are users of these services, and 8,000 are people with disabilities. I'm going to share the links on the chat, and yeah, thank you for all for this invitation, and I am able for any question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for telling us more about the services that you offer round the clock to hundreds of thousands of people. A question or a topic that we haven't touched so much so far is about funding. So how do you fund these services?
Mm-hmm. In the case of the Spanish Red Cross Telecare service, we have the two opportunities to, sometimes we apply for a call public contest from the public administrations. So we cover the service for the administration and for the end users is a free service. And in other cases, we offer the private service that, for example, in Catalonia or in other regions of Spain, the end users can get by themselves the service. Our feeling is that with the time, all the accessible functions added to the different services are more and more free for the end users. But this is the context, for example, in Spain.
Thank you very much. I'll move now on to our next speaker. I'll just say as well, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll try and get to them at the end. We are running a little bit late, but I hope we have some time for a few questions from you. We'll now move on to Heidi Hutala from Finland. She's been working for 20 years in the disability field in Finland, and she currently works for KVPS in their development department and is responsible for activities relating to strengthening the self-determination of persons with intellectual disabilities. So Heidi, could you please just tell a little bit more about your work on digital inclusion? Thanks.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I will talk something about digital inclusion in general from the people with intellectual disabilities point of view. And the KVPS is a service foundation for people with intellectual disabilities. Oh, wait a second, I have to, okay. I can't seem to, oh, okay, now it's working, yeah. So the KVPS is Service Foundation for People with Intellectual Disability, And we are a non-governmental organization, and in KVPS we have development activities, respite care services, and apartments and group housing. And as Rachel said, I work in a development apartment of our organization, and we work with people with intellectual disabilities or special needs and family members, professionals, and municipalities, and try to develop better services and tools to how to support self-determination and inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. So the starting point, I think before COVID, the main focus on working with people with intellectual disabilities was face-to-face meetings and interactions. And as we all know, that changed during the COVID, and we were in a situation where we were forced to find solutions and ways to connect with people online. And it was easier with the professionals and family members for us, but quite challenging with the people with intellectual disabilities. And because we feel that inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities is very important to us, and we did found some solutions, but felt that we need more information about how we can support the digital inclusion and what challenges we need to solve. And because of this, we started by organizing 2 workshops for people with intellectual disabilities, where we discuss about digital inclusion, and we also gathered some information from professionals in different digital related developing projects in disability field nationally. And I will now share some key points which we discovered, and some of those have already brought up by previous presentators, but yeah. Mainly in Finland, digital inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities is quite polarized. On the other hand, there is a big group of people who doesn't have access to digital world at all. And on the other hand, there is a lot of especially young people for whom digitalization is a part of everyday life and normal way to do things. But there is a few general challenges which are preventing the digital inclusion. First, there is accessibility, and there are many different challenges on accessibility. First is the information. Most of the information related to digital services, apps, or platforms isn't in easy to read form. And we also discovered that people with intellectual disability doesn't have an information what services or platforms there are available to use or how to use those. And the challenge is also that usually the digital services or platforms, etc., are also quite complicated to use, and you have to know how to operate in different levels. And there is also constant change going on in digital world. For example, in platforms, apps, or services, there are updates and visual appearance changes, and for people who usually needs time and support to learn new things, this is a really big challenge. And there is also a big challenge for people to buy, for example, smartphones, tablets, or laptops, because at least in Finland, they are quite expensive. And people with intellectual disabilities tend to be on low incomes. And I don't know if this is especially in Finland, but we have also big problem that it is quite difficult to get bank ID if you are an intellectually disabled person. So you can't use it in the identification in services or apps or anything else. And we found out also that negative attitudes and fears of support workers or family members also challenge the digital inclusion. And quite often people supporting don't really understand necessity or benefits of using the digital services, apps, or platforms. And even often the people with intellectual disabilities do not receive the necessary individual support to use, for example, the digital services or devices. And this is often because lack of skills of supporting persons. So in general, in the case of people with intellectual disabilities, I think the role of professionals and other support networks can still be seen as gatekeepers to digital inclusion. And even if people with intellectual disabilities want to develop their digital skills, often they do not have the opportunity or support to do so. And also there are cases where low abilities to manage risks or experiences of bullying or exploitation in internet can create fear of using the digital devices, platforms, or apps. But luckily there is some good practices and possibilities for people with intellectual disabilities too. So when people do have access and possibilities to join the digital world and get the right support, there are many positive things to follow. First, digital services, devices, platforms, and apps enable new ways to connect with other people and participate in activities that are important to person. And they also give lots of opportunities to share thoughts and influence in different ways the things that are important. And using the digital services and devices also increase the independence of individuals in their everyday life. And people with intellectual disabilities and also the professionals working in the intellectual disability field feels that digital inclusion have a positive effect on persons' well-being, quality of life, and self-esteem. And it also gives person the opportunities to use and develop their own skills and competencies. And finally, some general thoughts about the digital inclusion. I think that people with intellectual disabilities feel quite strongly that joining the digital world is part of their self-determination and rights. But in general, at least in Finland, how we see the inclusion of a person in need of support is not expected to kind of evolve when time and society changes. And I think that this is what has happened also with digital inclusion. It is seen as something extra, not necessary. And also I think that very little attention has been paid to the needs of intellectually disabled people, and their expertise has not been used in the development of digital world. And as a result for that, for example, services, platforms, or apps are not accessible and do not make equal inclusion possible for all people. And I think that peer support should be seen and used as an important part of digital support. And some organizations in Finland in elderly services have developed good practices around the peer support. And I think that is really important. And I think that in Finland we have some good practices and great development projects around digital inclusion, but in general there is a need for change And these challenges affects not only people with intellectual disabilities, but also the elderly population and other marginal groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I think it's good to see that we're touching on many similar issues, raising up against accessibility and attitudes as well. I think important to mention that digital inclusion can't be seen as an extra anymore. It is in today's society. It's important that everybody has access and is included in the digital sphere, as so much of that is now part of our everyday reality. In some of the challenges that you talked about access to infrastructure. So for example, being able to access tablets and things like that was an issue. Yeah. And also maybe a new aspect that you brought up was also training, not just for the people themselves to be able to use it, but also for the people who will be training them. So if you could you tell us a little bit more about how you overcame these issues during COVID?
Yeah, I think that we have our social enterprise Tukena Ltd, and we work quite closely with the housing units there. There is over 40 around the Finland. And first there were quite a lot of challenges, because in these housing units, there wasn't that many equipment devices, or they weren't capable to just use online services. And we started to organize some daytime activities. We led the workshops in online, and then the workers or the staff members in the housing units were providing the support for people with intellectual disabilities to how to join the online services. And we have also quite many expert by experience groups, and we were trying during the COVID, we were trying to organize the meetings online, but we also we had some challenges, because some of our group members didn't have any devices or didn't know how to use those. So we organized some individual support and try to, like, hand in hand point of view we started to learn how to use the devices, how we are communicating online, and how to support. And when some of the experts by experience, they were living in the group homes and they didn't have the devices, so we provided laptop or tablet for them to use. So, but there is still quite many challenges, and we are trying to overcome them, but the things are not ready yet. So
thank you very much. So we'll now move on to our final speaker, Ainhoa Marcos. For the last 4 years, Ainhoa has specialized in the field of accessibility through her MA in accessibility for the smart city. And she's also a technician for Union Accesibilidad, where she currently develops projects related to tourism, culture, strategic planning. So she'll be speaking a little bit more about her social research on telemonitoring devices. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, and congrats for this workshop, and thank you for this invitation. To end with these talks, we propose to talk about a report that was carried out in our social research department. It's a report on accessibility in health telemonitoring devices. First of all, the context, because we live in a society in which intensive use is made of information and communication technologies in almost all areas and environments. The DISCAPnet Accessibility Observatory has a really important role. It has been in operation for almost 20 years now. It's an initiative of the operational program to fight discrimination, co-financed by the European Social Fund and Fundación Wolfe, to improve digital literacy and access to the information society for people with disabilities. It's in this context that this report on accessibility in health telemonitoring devices is developed and published. Specific the phase 2, because there is a phase 1. The project, this report was published, if I'm not wrong, 2-3 months ago. I think it was in February. What is the project about? The main objective was to analyze a sample of personal devices to take biometric measurements focused on chronic diseases, such as heart failure, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. Among the specific objectives, to incorporate the perspective of users through the development of tests in the use of devices for healthcare, which means the main assets from this report is analysis of UX, user experience. Which devices were analyzed? 3 different models of blood pressure monitors, 2 different models of pulse oximeters, which are devices to measure the amount of oxygen in blood, 2 different models of glucometers to measure capillary blood glucose, that is the sample with the prick, and glucose monitoring systems using sensors, 2 different models as well. Who were the users? Most of them people with disabilities, 2 blind users, 4 users with low vision, 2 users with hearing impairments, from deafness to hearing loss, 1 user with cognitive disability, 2 users with motor disability, 2 persons over 65 years old, and finally 1 user without any disability. So let's see these main findings, the key findings of the report. First of all, those devices without voice option, controls, and buttons easily identifiable by touch couldn't be tested by blind people. Regarding blood pressure monitors, devices with voice control could be tested by blind users, although external assistance was required for the initial device setup. Blind users also suggest to improve the accessibility of the buttons by changing the design, such as the shape, color, braille on top of them. In general, all users find the device option highly useful. Persons with motor disability and even persons with hearing impairments recognize that the voice option gives them security. Persons with motor disability find it difficult to adjust the arm cuff, which is very important in these devices, of course. It's a common request to provide user manuals in accessible formats. For example, braille, voice option, accessible PDF through QR code or website, easy read, pictograms, and so on. And this is going to emerge in the analysis of the next devices. This is very common, this request. Regarding pulse oximeters, all users report an intuitive use, which is positive, with exception of blind users who were not able to use the devices due to the lack of voice option and accessible buttons. Main requests to improve the user manuals to become accessible, also to use larger characters when displaying information together with higher levels of contrast. In terms of the glucometers, users unfamiliar with those type of devices have experienced some difficulties to load the Proact, especially the user with cognitive disability. Users with low vision positively assess the lightening of the screen. Some remarkable features: the audible warning to confirm that the strip has been inserted correctly and that the test can be done with a small amount and quickly. On the devices lack a quick guide to use, easily and to understand and accessible in order to properly set up the device. It also lacks the display backlight, which is not adequate for users with low vision, and a start button with a M letter on it that was reported by users over 65 years old. And to end with glucose monitoring systems. Blind people report difficulties when first connecting the sensor and the transmitter of the device. Users with low vision cannot access to graphics and reports offered by the app. People with a visual disability can use a screen reader, for example, VoiceOver, to activate alarms and events. People with hearing impairments report difficulties when opening the device and mounting it. And regarding the warnings, they suggest to improve the app with visual alarms to prevent the installation of a second one in order to report any anomaly. In general, users demand to have more information on how to use the app, being currently very scarce. One of the models tested allows the configuration of different types of sounds. This feature is positively valued by users with a visual disability. And finally, it could be recommendable to use the use of larger characters and higher contrast. We heard that before. And to end with this brief talk, some recommendations for developers and manufacturers. First of all, appropriate front and control size, but also contrast to ensure that the contents are displayed properly. Second one, buttons must be easily identifiable by touch. In the third place, adequate way of operating. People who don't have the ability to see can both obtain the information visually displayed and navigate through operations without missing information. Fourth, to help people with motor disabilities, devices must be easily manipulated and grasped without the need to apply force. Fifth, maximize compatibility with assistive technologies, but also maximize compatibility with health platforms to ensure that users can track their data in one accessible environment. 7, in those products equipped with mobile apps for its use and management, those must comply with accessibility requirements. 8, international standards and recommendations in terms of universal accessibility must be applied. And 9, last but not least, developers should consider users' needs by involving them in the creation of the products. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for talking more about your research. What do you think is the future of Telecare based on your research and what you've been doing?
I would like to ask you, Rachel, if because I have to be honest, I was not directly involved in this report.
Okay.
the person wasn't able to be here today at this schedule, but please send us all your questions and further questions from the people, because we will really glad to answer all of them.
No worries. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, because
yeah.
it's not my speciality.
Yeah.
I don't want to be wrong, but we would like to ask all questions and
No, thank you very much. I maybe have one question that I can ask to Anna and Heidi. What do public authorities do in Spain and Finland to promote telecare services and their accessibility? Is there any action plans or strategies in either of your countries? And I don't know, Steve, if you know for the UK. So Anna or Heidi, yeah.
Yeah, I think in Finland, the government has formed some working groups for that, and they have made some guidelines for the digital inclusion, for example, but it isn't shown in legislation or something like that, and I think the main challenge is also that there is no specific organization or party that will handle the support for the people who need the support. So the people who need the support for the using of digital services or something like that, they are relied on the family members or support workers or something like that. So there is no general like guidelines for people, how we support people to use digital services, but there are these some strategies, how did we improve that and how it should be.
Rachel, in the UK, I mean, Telecare has been around for a long time. And I think now, and I've talked to Jan about this, I think we talk more about remote care. So health, so basically your data is going to a third source. The thing about Telecare, it's really seen as a domain of the elderly. And there's been a hell of a lot of work done around providing Telecare services, which is normally by the local authority to a third party. And that's where the difficulty comes, because some of the provision of Telecare can be very old-fashioned, where actually newer items are around. What is seeming to be happening is remote care is developing and building up, and there's a tremendous amount of work going on in that area. But the mainline services are starting to dominate rather than the specialist services. And I think that's the right way to go, so that your market increases because your services are accessible to a wide range of people. But it's still early day for people with intellectual disabilities.
Thank you. And Anna?
Yeah, I just want to add, in a Spanish national level, we have now rules that you have to follow in order to provide the telecare service. So you have to give the answer to the people that need some special ways to communicate. And there are still working groups in order to review this rule every some time. And it's also a really big responsibility for the user and the providers, the stakeholders of the telecare. So if you show to the public administration that we are able to give this good service for people, for example, with disabilities, they are going to include that in the mandatory rule. So we are working in the both hands.
Thank you very much. As there are no other questions in the Q&A, I think we can end there. I'll maybe end with a few conclusions that I took from the webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you very much to our speakers. So in today's world, digital inclusion and access is a core right that everybody should have access to. Speaking of that, equality and equal access to technology is really important. the technology can be useful for all of us, but we're still waiting for maybe these more mainstream technologies to catch up with that idea of universal design and making things accessible for all. We have to put the people first, and we have to think about what is the objective of using this technology. It's about meeting their needs and enabling them to be included in society and live their life how they want to. We also have to be a little careful about the ethics. Technology needs to be safe and secure for all those that are using it. Access to infrastructure is important, both things like the internet and also hardware. Sometimes there can be issues around funding and being able to access the technology. Training is also important, not just for those who will use the technology, the end user, but also the support service, those working in the support service. It's important that everybody has the correct training. And also funding is really important. Who pays for this? Who pays for technology? Who pays for the service, so that everybody is able to use it and be included. So I'd like to invite you to the Accessibility website after this, where you can find more information on the project and how you can participate in the network, either via the mapping tool or the forum. This workshop has been recorded and it will be available on the Accessibility project website. And just to end again by saying thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the partners and associates of Accessibility. I hope you have a good day, and we hope to see you at another workshop soon. Thank you very much. Oh, Emmanuel, I'm sorry. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about.
Just to say goodbye. Huh? Thank you so much for this event.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.